Well, that was less than enjoyable. We'll give everyone a minute, see who comes up. And I'll also go ahead and post this in the Discord. There we go. Hey, welcome. My laptop has decided to completely lag out on me, key-wise, but I almost didn't do the stream today because I managed to blow up my WSL2 because I uninstalled it, and we got it working in an hour. So that's fun. I also now have a clean work environment. But hi, thanks for joining. So today we're going to start from the nbdev template. And basically what I'm going to teach you guys how to do is take your nbdev repo from not even looking like this. Let me try and find a good example. Maybe nbverbose? Yeah, this works. nbverbose works. So we're going to take it from looking like this, where that's, for the most part, always closed, and anytime you open it, it's going to close that. And it's kind of dull and gray, and, the FastAI logo's down there. And we're going to take that and turn it into something like this, where, the colors are different. We have these cool little things here. Oh, hey, Vendent, how are you? Add our own little logo into here and have this neat little custom sidebar. So all these little tweaks that can take your sort of dullish, very basic FastAI looking documentation website and turn it into something that, while it looks similar, is different in a lot of ways. Another thing that we're doing differently, you'll notice, is like we have this nav which turns on and off the navigation bar. Here I can link to like my About Me, which says about me that I've modified, and even the GitHub repo of the actual repo itself. This will be recorded and sent somehow to YouTube. The logistics behind that, I'm not 100% certain yet. And hopefully I'm using music that YouTube won't copyright strike me with. Because Twitch at the very least won't. Welcome, I see we got a few more people. So let's talk about how we do that. Oh, and another subtle thing is, if you notice, nbdev and nbverbose both have the FastAI logo in the top left-hand corner. I have a tree. So basically we're going to talk about sidebar, colors, logos, as well as what we call a fave icon. And all of this is going to start from the nbdev template. So let's start there. I'm going to use this template, and we'll call this documentation demo. That's not going to be the name of our mini library, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll do that. And we'll make it public. And we'll create our repo. Now, a few things have mildly changed that I should probably point out, changed and or things you need to be aware of. Yes. Oh, documentation demo. If I was doing documents, I would have done that. That's a very nice call. But for this, I'm not going to do documents, despite how I should have. The one thing that you'll notice that you really need to pay attention to, besides like settings.ini and everything else that normally comes with an nbdev notebook and an nbdev repo, is what's currently inside this docs folder. If any of you have gotten any nbdev repo working, you've probably noticed that about once a month or so, you get a very annoying security warning. And it stems from this thing called gem file. So FastAI's documentation is built off something called Jekyll. And Jekyll is a lightweight, basically website renderer. So it can render things like Markdown, HTML, and CSS, and everything else that normally comes within the general easy to use spectrum. That's why nbdev will let you do a notebook or build your own documentation with Markdown, because Jekyll can then go, oh, I can read that and I can use that. So we'll go ahead and roll with it. Hopefully the levels aren't too bad. They look a little bad. Give me a moment. All right. Hopefully now I'm not bursting any eardrums. I was getting feedback on my own, so you guys were probably dying. Now, this was cleaned up quite a bit. Jeremy did clean this up so we don't get nearly as many security warnings. The important things for you to know here is this source Ruby gems. All right, just know that's normally what's in a Jekyll file, or a gem file, sorry. In it, we also have to specify that we want to use, a little bit low. All right, that a little better? I was hitting the red, so I didn't want to 100% burst everyone's eardrums. And the other important thing here is this Jekyll remote theme. So if we look in here, this is most of what our documentation needs, and there's really nothing that tells us how to build things. For example, I'll pull up one of my old repos before the template things really got involved. And in here, we see all of this data includes layout, CSS, fonts, images, all of these folders, even some JavaScript. And I don't want to worry about that. I do machine learning. I like to build cool things quickly, but I don't know anything about CSS and HTML. What does all of that mean? Well, with the use of this Jekyll remote theme here, FastAI uses, and specifically nbdev uses, a FastAI Jekyll theme. And so this is a remote theme that we just use, copy and paste, without us ever having to touch it ever being in our repo, and our docs will render with it. That's also how we're going to customize it, which we'll look at in a little bit. All right, cool. So we have some docs. The first thing we're going to do here is I'm going to quickly clone this in. I think that's all right. Ignore the giant... that's annoying. Ignore the giant wall of text and the fact that I have to use sudo. Still trying to figure out how to get Windows to like me. I've set up my Jupyter to run off of one of my D hard drives, and it's always wanting me to put sudo for everything. And need to look into how I can adjust those permissions. So don't copy the sudo things I do if you're following this one-to-one, is basically what I'm saying. All right, so now if we check in my working folder, I have our documentations demo. Now with any nbdev repo, you're going to need to set up your settings. So in our case, I'm going to say libname, our library name, we'll just call it doc. We'll do it. Documentation demo. We don't care about enterprise. User is, of course, myself. The description will say a demonstration of how to customize Jekyll and nbdev documentation. Some keywords, so we'll say documents, FastAI, nbdev, Jekyll. Author is, of course, myself. Copyright will also be myself. branch in this case is master because of how we have the template set up. We're gonna eventually change a few of these, but for right now, that's fine. We'll start very basic before we pile on all the information. We don't care much about this. Actually, requirements I think I do want to have, because we'll set this up to be NB verbose. Since someone decided to throw documents demo in there, we might as well utilize documents. And for those who don't know, documents is basically documentation comments for inputs that we can use with our notebooks. You'll see why later. It's not particularly relevant to this, but it's cool to look at. All right, so that worked. You'll notice that like the first commit will always fail, and it's specifically because that settings.ini didn't have anything going for it. So, how do we want to do this? I think before we go ahead and push anything, we'll go ahead and run the, we'll go ahead and build the documentation. So to build the docs, the first thing we need to do is slightly modify, oh, that's annoying. Give me a moment. I might have just shot myself in the foot. The shooting myself in the foot is due to the fact that Jupyter is currently attempting to run off of the D drive, and let's go with permissions aren't being handy. Let's see if this works. Because when in doubt, sudo. All right, so ideally this should start a notebook up for me in a moment. All right, now let's try that. Okay, well, that's annoying. I'm basically trying to give it right conditions. So that we can actually do what we want to do. Because it's like no hub, Jupyter notebook list, port. All right, this is turning into a debugging stream, as all things do. Oh, that's why. All right, so it's sudo nohup allow root. Cool. So let's try this one more time. I think we're working now. Cool. And then we do Jupyter notebook list. There we go. That's what I want. Okay. Now I should be able to open core, and if my hope is right, haha, I can write. Okay. Well, that was unexpected, but now we can run things. Thank goodness. Back to the topic at hand. All right, so we're going to say, we'll call this addition, run through our basic addition tutorial. So we're going to say addition, or we'll call this arithmetic. Basic arithmetic funcs. And I think that's spelled wrong. No, it is. Okay. Then we'll say nb verbose, and I don't think, yeah. We'll let nb verbose install in the background. nb verbose is a literal one-to-one replacement for nbdev that adds that extra little functionality I mentioned. So after that's all done, should now be able to do this, and then we'll say export. We'll say addition. We'll define an addition function that takes in A, the first number to add, B, the second number to add. We'll say it will return a float or an integer, the sum of A and B, adds two numbers together, and before finally return A plus B. All right, simple so far, right? We just want to get a very basic module working that can do what we need it to. The next step is, now that we have something here that we can actually see, is we need to modify our index, because our index is going to try and have a cell like this, where it's from yourlib.core import star. So on every repo you ever build with this, the index will always break first time around unless you edit it. So we're going to say from documents demo.core import star. And there we go. Now we have everything we need. So from here, let me go ahead and open up a new terminal because we had to go ahead and change that. I do not like the styling of this. I might actually just use this external PowerShell. All right, so we're going to go to Documents Demo, and we're going to say from here, before we do anything, we need to do nbdev build lib, nbdev clean notebooks, and if you install the Git hooks, it should do this for you automatically. I'm not going to focus on that as much because we care about the documentation, but you can find that in the nbdev docs. And then finally, we're going to say nbdev build docs. So that'll go through and run everything, make sure that we convert everything over. And, oh. Don't mind me. Until I get this fixed, I have to literally include sudo on everything. There we go. All right, so now if we do a git status, we'll see that we've made we've modified our stuff, but in our docs, we have some new things. that just randomly appeared. So let's actually go explore what those are instead of just pretending like they're there and not doing anything. So we have this data folder, this config, YAML, and images. Now, a few things that we already had here was this core.html is just the rendered HTML of 00 core, right? That was there. Feed was there last time, as well as gem file. But sidebar wasn't. So let's go explore what each of those three things have. So data is usually not something you should modify. So in nbdev and Jekyll terms, these are going to have stylizing choices as well as the actual sidebar rendering that Jekyll can read. Now, as you can see, it says in all caps here, this file was auto-generated. Do not edit. If you want a custom sidebar, this is not where you do it. We need to edit sidebar.json instead, which we open that, so we'll go talk about that in a moment. Top nav just discusses the top-down navigations and what they are. I haven't worked a whole lot with customizing this, but my personal advice is just leave it how it is. Any sort of things that you have here, you don't really need to modify at all. This would not be the first thing that I would jump to switch how everything looks. Also, let me know if we can see this okay or if I need to zoom in a little bit. Now, this config YAML file is probably the most important file here. This is what Jekyll will read to render any of your documentation. So we have a whole bunch of settings that we can do here. So like, we have our repository name, navigation title, site titles, and we can change this if we want to customize it a little differently for a few things. We have those things that we had in our settings.ini, or settings.ini, right? So like company name, description, but then there's a few other things here. So like we have use math, which lets us enable or disable LaTeX or KTeX. We can do some Google Analytics if we want to, as well as adding Google search support, and it has a little link to the documentation for that. We're going to talk about this later when we render the documentation locally, but this is where it would stem from. These you don't particularly need to care about. These you don't need to care about. These you don't need to care about. These defaults you shouldn't need to have to care about. If you decided that you want to keep the home sidebar but make like your own sidebar for you to use, that's like a one-to-one for you to experiment with, you'd specify it in here or as well as the top nav. That way you don't like completely destroy it and delete the one that works. That'd be one way to do it. We're going to show the other way, which is just modifying it. You'll see here that we have this plugins and remote theme. So this is that nbdev Jekyll thing I mentioned. nbdev Jekyll theme, that I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. So this is what FastAI's remote theme is, and Jekyll will say, oh, you want me to use that? We will build and base our entire documentation off of that one template. And then here's our base URL. So for me, this is going to be live at MuellerZR, github.io, documentation demo if I set up GitHub pages, which is another thing we can do quickly because it's worth putting it in there. So I sent it in here, right? But it's saying page not found. It's rendered everything. All of the sites are saying that it should go to there based on what it just told us. Why is it not enabled here? We need to enable GitHub pages. So that now is in settings, pages. Now it's going to say source. GitHub pages is currently disabled. Select a source to enable GitHub pages. Rather than none, we're going to select our branch. So in our case, this is master. And we have two options here, root or docs. Select docs. You know you didn't select docs if when you render your website, there is no templating. I'll show an example of what I mean now. So I've selected root, and this will break. But how will it break? Anytime you test with web pages, you can have like one or two options. You can either test locally or be like me and just say screw it, do it live, and test everything in GitHub. Would not recommend. Yaml yells at me about this all the time, but that's just how I work. Anytime you want to update it, though, manually to see like if any changes have happened, you're going to hit open link in an incognito tab. And what this will do is force everything to reload. So you can see here that we don't really have anything working. You know, like, yes, it's cool. It's a Jekyll website. It's cool to look at. But this doesn't look like this. They don't look the same at all. And it's because we didn't select the docs folder. So all of those little gem files, that config YAML, all of that is how you tell GitHub pages, you know, this is how I want my website to look. And you tell Jekyll, this is how I want my website to look. So now after we give it a moment, we'll go ahead and open a new incognito. It's currently rendering. I'm also going to go ahead and throw this into the chat too, so you guys can actually see the code. Give it a few more moments. Usually it doesn't take too long for it to render. Oh wait, have I not pushed? I haven't. All right, back to what we were doing, because we got sidetracked with enabling GitHub pages. We'll go back to that later. It's enabled. Images, this is any sort of images that you want attached at any point. So if you want images that are going to render that, say, point to a specific file directory in the repo, generally you should have them come to this images folder instead. That way Jekyll knows to read it. I think there's a way for it to work without it, but generally you should just throw it in there. And then finally we have this sidebar.json. Now, if you set custom sidebar to to false, which is what we have it currently, you never need to modify this. It will forever look like this, and that's how it is stuck. The first thing we are doing is having a custom sidebar, though. So now that we have all of that done, we'll say git add, because we need this make file and config and everything in order for Jekyll to render it how we want. We'll say commit initializing our documentation. I think, yeah, let's go ahead and do git config user.name Zach Mueller, git config we'll commit one more time, origin master. I'm hoping it won't ask me for my username and password, but it might. Annoying, but that's fine. Give me a moment. Stopping my screen while I try and find my password again. In the meantime, if there are any questions over anything that just happened, feel free to ping them at me. Because this may take me a little bit. All right, sorry about that. Had to go and actually get my GitHub login. Where were we? Here we were. Paste. Give that a moment to push. And there we go. So now, if we try opening this up in a few moments, we'll let everything push first. Usually, another Jekyll thing is in the nbdev repo, it will actually give you this page build in this GitHub Pages. So usually a minute or two after this is finished, you can go ahead and check your documentation webpage again. So we'll check it. And eventually, oh, I know why. Right. Let me see where it's live at. There we go. All right, so this does not look right. Why does this not look right? Do we have it coming from docs? All right, we do. Trying to remember what else usually goes wrong when we have this. We'll try adjusting the base URL. No, we'll do it here. Doing that documentation demo might have actually messed us up a little bit. Let's adjust the base URL. Rebuild the docs. This wasn't particularly how I had this in mind, but we'll go ahead and debug it live. This would be good to have on the record too. So the first thing I'm checking when I'm debugging is to make sure that we didn't miss anything in our requirements and so forth. So let's refresh this. What else could there be? Usually this will all come out of my config, this config here. Repository is documentation demo. We already adjusted the config. Sitemap shouldn't have anything we need. Let me try. Adjusting our config. Because currently, while our theme is going, it's not going how it should be. Basically, is one way to think on it. If it continues to not work, then I will go ahead and we'll run through the punishment that is getting it working locally. And skip all of this, but there we go. All right, so what did it, if you ever have that happen to you, which is a very important thing, this is a common bug that I've seen with nbdev repos, is first make sure your base URL lines up, and then make sure your repository lines up as well. Two very important things to note. Otherwise, you'll get those issues like we saw there. And this is just basically Jekyll saying, I don't quite understand what you're doing and what you're trying to tell me to do. And so there's collision. That's also usually why you want the repo names to align with the documentation website names. Because otherwise you get into headaches like this, which is fine. We pushed through it, we persevered, and now we can go to the next step. Let me know if there's some questions, though, as to anything I just said, because that's really a lot of Jekyll nonsense. All right, so now let's go into the first little bit of customization, which is this sidebar. So currently, if we go to our documentation, right, you can see that we have this like documentation demo, overview, and arithmetic. But what if I don't want it to be like this single nested loop? What if I want it to be like separated sections? So that's where this sidebar.json comes in. And this website called JSONlint. The amount of headaches I have had due to incorrect JSONs when I've been attempting to get all of this working is probably the second most use of my time when it comes to nbdev and customizations, because JSON is really annoying. But the way how you understand how this is written is, so we have our, let's go to our sidebar JSON here. So JSONs are just basically nested, it's a data type that has nested information about itself. So like here we have documentation demo, and then we have a dictionary of the name followed by the URL. Now you notice that we don't have something like, muellerzr.github.io /github.io/documentation demo / yada 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 yada. That's because Jekyll only cares about what we call local addresses, which means it's relative to what we're currently working out of. So we're saying my overview is going to live in index. That's what this slash means. So anytime you see a slash or like me just going to here, what we're really modifying is the index.ipy notebook, or in Jekyll terms, index.html. Now, if I want to customize this, there's a few things that you need to be aware of with this specific theme. We can make nested items. So like if we look at Walk with Fast AI, which is my other website, we have this course 2020, and then we have a nested list, right? A too long nested list. That is as best as you're going to get. We can't really get triple nested. That is a limitation of Jekyll, not us, and that is not necessarily something that we can bypass as easily as we could bypass the other things. So that's the first limitation. Second limitation, everything has to be nested. I can't just have a link out here. That will not work. It will not render. So you need to have a section in here for absolutely everything, even if that section only includes one thing. Now you don't have to include the homepage in here if you don't want to. You can. If you do, when you open it up, it'll point to it always. I don't think Walk with Fast AI has a link to the homepage here unless it's an introduction. Yeah. So you probably should. You don't have to, but you should. So let's rewrite our current automatic sidebar JSON to make things a little more organized. So we're going to come over to JSONlint, and we're going to first close off this section and open up a new section. One thing to know about when writing in JSON is you need commas after everything that's a list. So having a comma here, it would say it's invalidated because there's nothing after it. It's expecting something to be there. So if we just get rid of that, why expected string got... I'm trying to think right now of what's wrong with the JSON. Again, as I said, this is the #1 reason for headaches. All right, I'm stealing a peek at WalkFast AI. So shoot me. We need sidebar.json. How do I have this set up here? Oh, that's why I need a name. We'll call this performing math. No wonder I missed something. So we need the name of the section we're going to call it and everything that should be included in the section. So we'll call this introduction. Validate our JSON. It works. We'll go throw this back into Sidebar Json. I'm going to go ahead and overwrite it. And the last thing we need to do is go into our settings and enable the custom sidebar. So that is, I just saw it here. Set this to true. We'll go ahead and rebuild our documentation. Oh, that's just copy pasted. We really want this one. If we check Git again, you can see that while we modified the settings and the sidebar, it then automatically went and adjusted that little home sidebar YAML file we had earlier. So now we can do commit new sidebar. There we go. We have everything. And go ahead and push to GitHub. Cool, so now everything is there, and we'll give it a few more moments and render our new sidebar, which we would expect to, based on this, we would expect it to have 2 sections. One, an introduction that should automatically open when we go to the page because that's set to our home. And one called performing math that points to our generated HTML. Now, when you're writing this on your own, you actually already know how everything is going to be rendered. So this URL here will always correlate to the rendered notebook as well. So it's, in our case, 00 core IPY notebook. So we remove the numbers and replace IPY notebook with HTML. And that's all that there is to it. Next, we'll look at having custom Markdown in it. So that way we can say not have to write something in a notebook if we don't want to before we move into a few other things. So let's go check on how this is looking. Cool, so we have our new sidebar. So you can see we have introduction, overview, performing math, arithmetic. And everything is looking about how it should. And we have our documents here, which automatically documents our parameters. And things are looking really, really good. Everything is working as it should. I think that should go, yeah, close. Actually, why is that not working? Oh, that's because I need to adjust the Git URL. So here it's, so if this ever happens where your source links don't run to where you want to, you need to look in the settings at the Git URL. So in our case, we have a different library name than our actual GitHub repo. So down here, I need to specify, rather than libname, which is what this is currently using, I need to say, what is it? Documentation demo? Documentation demo. There we go. Now we can see that it showed up. So we just copy this little section here, throw it into here, and rebuild our documentation. Fix the Git URL. Yeah, I guess fix the Git URL. There we go. I'll go ahead and throw in my password. At one point I need to stash this, but that's fine. All right, so now if we check it again, what we should see is our documentation will actually point to where we need it to. Now, usually, we broke something. What did we break? It was because we did this. So because it broke with our Jekyll theme. Let's go back into that config and make sure that we don't need to change anything else. Repository is fine. Base URL is wrong. It should be documentation demo. So I think that got automatically adjusted. Let me go look. I don't want to browse. I want to see what changed. Yep, it automatically switched that. So let's try rebuilding. This should still say documentation's demo at the bottom. Good, it does. All right, so now we'll do git commit and fix site URL. Nothing like some healthy debugging live on stream. But if we're not debugging this, then that means my demo's going wrong, going too right. Because these are all things that I constantly face whenever I'm dealing with nbdev renderings, honestly, and doing these customizations. So now you guys know how to actually kind of fix them. All right, so now we give it a few more minutes. Or in my case, I'm going to give it seconds because I'm impatient. Let's go see. It still didn't work. Why did you still not work? Oh, because that's still documentation demo. Hang on. All right, so now we should be fine. Now as to why you're in the red, let's go investigate. Index failed. Why did index fail? So while we render that for a bit, I'm just going to quickly check why index is failing. Because it's documentation. All right, so that's why. Actually, wait, I need to do that, and then we can do everything. All right, there we go. And now if we go over to our web page, wherever I have that open, we have it fixed again. Or at least we should have it fixed. What have we done here? It was just a cached version. Okay. Welcome to why we view things in a private browser. Because your browser likes to cache things. And so what that means is it saves an old version of what was currently there so you can load it faster. In our case, it was giving us a heart attack because it tried to load in the old version of the index and saying everything breaks and doesn't work. So, all right, so now we have a working sidebar and what should be working source code. Most projects, you don't need to go through the 10 minutes of extra debugging we had to do to get this, so long as you're careful with naming. And that's just a constraint of a system when you're trying to do things as automated as FastAI tries to. All right, so next, let's do a poll, see who's paying attention. Which should we change? Should we try and change the color of the sidebar or get the FastAI logo out of here and put our own? You guys tell me which we should do. All right, there's one for the FastAI logo. And if that's our only one, then we'll do that. So the FastAI logo is actually not too bad to replace. Let's sort of talk about why. So this is going to involve this images directory, if I'm remembering correctly. Just in case, I'm going to put my cheat sheet on the left. But actually, what this really involves is it involves looking at the template. So let's go look at that template now. We've made it far enough along that we're closing everything else, and we're going to go look at that Jekyll template I mentioned. So that's fastai/nbdev Jekyll theme, which I'll go ahead and give you guys a link to that down here. So you can see here that it talks about directions for local and overriding our theme. So let's zoom in on this a bit and read what it says. So it says any site that uses a theme will only use the files in layouts, includes, sass, and assets. If you wish to override this theme, you must create the same directory and file in your local project. For example, to change your site's fave icon, which is that little thing in the taskbar up here, you can create a file named assets images fave icon to override the default. So that's how we override anything with this theme. We find a file in here, its location, and it will be relative to our docs folder. So for instance, in assets, I have a whole bunch of things right here that I can modify, images, and there's our fave icon. What we care about is company logo, because company logo is what goes in that bottom right corner. So again, that is located in assets, images, and then it is company logo.png. So let's mock that, right? So I'm going to go in here, clear, go into my docs, and now I remember why we keep this up. Yeah, but that's bigger, so we'll do that. Now we have a data folder and a config folder. This was in an assets folder, so we'll make a directory called assets. And then in this assets folder, we want a company logo.png. Now, for the sake of this example, our company logo is going to be the Batman logo. So sue me. DC, please don't sue me. I love you. We're going to go ahead and save this image, and we'll call it Batman logo. And we'll go ahead and upload it to docs and assets. And there it is. And we want to call this company logo.png. This might wind up being too small, but we're going to try it. Because how big does this actually wind up being? Yeah, it winds up being fairly big. All right, so next, I don't believe we need to rebuild the documentation. I believe instead all we need to do is, if we do git status, git add. So that way it adds our new company logo. We'll go ahead and add a little commit message, and we'll say git push. I need that password again. And what we should see is in a minute or two, once it re-renders. Let's go take a look. All right, there we are. Open this up in a new tab. And ideally, well, let's actually debug this now. So how would we go about debugging this? If you're ever trying to debug and toy around with CSS and anything like that, if you right-click on any page, you can do inspect, which this will show you a whole bunch of scary HTML. And this is actually really helpful for us, because I want to know how I can change this, right? We want to change the logo, because clearly what I just did didn't work. So if we go down, hit inspect, we can see that its source is documents demo company logo.png, which for some reason, did we push? We did. For some reason, it's not being rendered right. Why is that? Oh, that's why. Did I misread the directions? I think I did. That needs to be moved to assets images. That is the other thing you need to be careful about when going through this exercise, is locations of files are extremely, exceedingly important. So in our case, our logo was just one directory up, but Jekyll didn't know what to do. It didn't even recognize that it was there. So now, if this fails again and I look like a fool, that is fine. Let's see what we got showing up here. Cache hasn't 100% removed yet, but I did just upload this. It might take a moment. Let me also make sure I named it right. Docs. Oh, hello. It's just gone. That's what our issue is. And the reason for that is we made, hi, hey Rebel Forces, hey DDMI. So basically right now we're, if you're just catching up, we're trying to change the logo that pops up in the bottom right corner of like nbdev docs. And the location of that is extremely important. It needs to go in a new file under docs, assets, images, company logo. The bug we just had is I did not throw it under images. And as you can probably tell by the fact that we've been going for an hour and we have made a very small amount of progress, you can sit here customizing websites all day long. I hit the wrong key. Which is why a lot of people get paid to do this, because there's a lot of work that goes into making your website look clean and nice. FastAI does a lot of the heavy lifting, but we can clearly customize that at any extent that we really need to or want to. So, fingers crossed, this time it works. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. We have Batman. We have Batman in 2 places now. All is well in the world. So that's how we change our fave icon. Now, this, obviously comes from the copyright, this Zach Mueller. It tells us when the site was last generated and so forth. But now we got rid of the FastAI logo and I could put my own. That's great. Let's play a little experiment. I'm curious if we can manage to change where that is. But before we do that, because that requires a little more effort actually, let's talk about that second part. So let's talk about how I can change how everything looks. So for me, I tend to just change the CSS, which is the color schemes and the format of everything, rather than like templates, because usually this does the job. Sure, so what we're basically doing in layman's terms is FastAI will go ahead and through nbdev auto-generate documentation for us from Jupyter notebooks. So this was all made through a Jupyter notebook. Literally this. So we took this notebook and nbdev can go and say, cool, I have this notebook. Let's go turn it into a very cool documentation template, essentially. And on the back end, we can use a web interface. So in our case, we're using something called Jekyll, which will read this auto-generated HTML or even Markdown file and throw it up into a web page for us to look at. So that is what we had here. Now, what we're currently going through is starting from what we were given. So this auto-generated thing that can generate us a pretty nifty documentation site and customize it how we want. So in our case, we just took the FastAI logo, threw on the Batman logo instead, and then earlier we also took a very standard looking sidebar and made it this little nested sidebar, which a recording of this will go up, and you can watch how we did that. It is when you're debugging it live, but when you have something like this where we have a session that's being recorded, you can time skip to the 3 minutes where we went through and did it, because it's actually not a lot of files or anything to do that. So like to get this working with this whole Batman logo, all I had to do once we figured out the right folder was go into my docs folder, make a folder called images, or sorry, go into my docs folder, make a folder called assets. That gets confusing. Make a folder called images, and then just throw in some picture called company logo.png. And nbdev and intern Jekyll will go, okay, cool, that's what we want to go in that bottom right corner. And that's all there is. That's the same thing for actually adjusting anything. So for instance, if we wanted to change the fave icon, which is this little thing that's in the top corner, let's look up Batman fave icons. So we want a tiny little Batman logo that we can use. We'll use this one, and we'll call it fave icon. We'll just call it fave icon. So similar to our images, yeah, Batman logo's copyright, but we're not publishing this anywhere. This is simply for fun. We're not going to make any money. I'm not worried about that. So now we're going to have our Batman logo, but we're going to, and actually I think that's the wrong one. This is the one we want. We're going to call this faveicon.ico. And that basically is saying that it's a fave icon. Next, we're going to go ahead and say git status. I'm going to clean my notebooks real quick and make sure, yep. I'm going to add, commit, add Batman fave icon. And now, I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to pull this off because Chrome is actually annoyingly good at caching the fave icons. But what we should see is when I open up the documentation next, rather than it giving me the FastAI logo, instead, we will have our logo. Let's find out. Yeah, Chrome's going to be a little annoying for us, isn't it? There we go. There it is. So you can see that we have, well, no, you can't see it because it's not over there. We have a little Batman icon chilling in the corner. So now we have 3 Batman. But basically, anytime you want to override any of these assets, that's what you'd go into. And we can see what those assets are by coming into this images. So like you can see that we have workflow arrow and collab.svg. And this collab SVG is like how FastAI can like have all this opening collab. It's auto-generated for us, so we just need to modify what that looks like. You know, if I really wanted to during Christmas time, I could even just turn that to like a bunch of Christmas candy canes. And all of my collab notebook open buttons would have Christmas canes on them. And so that's how we modify that. Which that's like 2/3 of... No, I don't personally work for FastAI. I've contributed a lot to all of the FastAI repos, and I'm very active in the FastAI community. And I'm friends, at least I hope. No, probably yelling about that. I'm friends with Jeremy. He mentored me when I was starting out. So FastAI is very close to home for me. And I'm very familiar with their framework and system and everything they do. So we've adjusted a few things, right? We've adjusted the sidebar. We've adjusted the logo. We've adjusted the fave icon. The last thing now that we need to learn how to adjust to basically get it to the point of walk with FastAI, right? Because we have a tree. We have a new fave icon. We have this nested sidebar. Is, of course, the color scheme. How do we do the color scheme, you ask? Well, this is where usually people who work in CSS tend to have a little fun. Because we're going to play with it live and find a color that matches. So I'm going to right click, hit inspect element. And down here I have all of these styles. So you see here we have navbar inverse, navbar collapse, this border color, and this little weird hexadecimal number here. So anything I change in this number will result in all of this being changed. So let's go look at color to hexadecimal converter. And I don't even want RGB. I want hexadecimal color. I think it's HTML color codes. Yeah, there we go. HTML color codes is what we want. I'll go ahead and link to it in the chat. FastAI is not like Coursera. Coursera is for profit. FastAI is not. All of their courses are free. You get a certification if you show up in place, but you do not need to have a certification to show that you did FastAI. I never did, and I have a job working as a deep learning software engineer. And FastAI is all I've ever done. So, personally, I love their courses. Some more than others, but they're extremely valuable as a curriculum. All right, so let's choose something like yellow. Well, it's going to be blinding for the eyes. We're going Batman theme, and generally Batman is black and yellow. So we have this F3F71C color code here. So now let's go back to where we were. And I'm going to replace the 6 digits here with our color code. And after I click it, I might need to do it in more than one place. It should at least be updating it. If it's not, usually that's a different issue. Let's see what we got. Here we go. That might be better. Haha! So I went over a little further. Inspect, and here we can find what we actually want. Well, that would have been helpful to find not 20 seconds ago. Let's do this like sort of darker gold. So we have this navbar inverse background color. And, we have it something like this. I'm going to go ahead and write down this color for us. That way we have it. But we don't have this being highlighted right. Right? This is yellow. This is not yellow. Inspect. It is this nav li active. And there we go. There's one other one, though. We have highlighted, which that should be our hover. So let's go ahead and inspect. We want, I think, to adjust this. We had it literally a moment ago. This is annoying me, but I can find our answer later. That earlier course was my own, Walk with FastAI. It's an additional course onto FastAI that I wrote. I recommend doing both, personally. I spent a lot of time on that course, and it was a culmination of 2 years of learning the FastAI library. And so it tries to take you into places that Jeremy and Sylvan didn't necessarily talk about or teach when they were doing the course. All right, so now how do we actually do that, right? Because we had where it was, and we know roughly how to get to there, but how do we actually override it? So for that, we are going to want to look at this Jekyll theme. So anything we want to override, remember it said that we need to override in layouts, includes Sass and assets. All right, so includes has all of our HTML templates. Layouts has more HTML templates, but assets has the CSS folder. And what we want to adjust is this theme blue. This theme blue is what will be used anytime you render or modify basically what you were doing. It will be what will be rendered when you load up the documentation website. There we go. That's what I want. So what I'm going to do is copy this entire thing. And in our docs folder, we're going to make a directory called, this is in assets. We're going to make a directory called CSS. And we're going to touch theme blue.css, right? Because we're mimicking what is here. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste what we just had there before. Now, when we were modifying this title up here, this was located at this navbar inverse navbar collapse. So let's look for that real quick. Navbar collapse. And really what I tend to do to make this very quickly, doing the shell, learning how to use the shell in Bash is one of the most valuable things you can do starting out, because it's super useful. We want this navbar inverse. So let's look for navbar inverse background color. And we're going to take this color we had here and replace it. And what this will do is update in our website everything that used that color in that particular spot to use our new one. I'm going to go a little further though. We're going to find and replace that with our new color. We're going to say all, and now everything should be blue, or should be yellow. Right, so if we do git status, make sure we add. So what changes do you do by inspecting the Chrome and temp? Basically, as an HTML, it lets me just modify it locally. Nothing is permanent. This is a one-way street. It's only, might not want yellow for the fonts. That's fair. Because that was the same. We'll go through and modify the font specifically in a moment. So it lets me go ahead and adjust everything temporarily, make sure it all works, and I'm adjusting the CSS over here. And actually, if we want to, we can look and see that this is A. So theme blue, we want this, so that's in the nav bar, that's fine. A nav bar, I don't quite, body print. H4s. Let's see where else we have our B at. That's the drop down. I think it's this. Which if it is, there might be a... When you make a change in Jupyter, it will become permanent. No, even if like I made it in here, like if I just went inspect and started like playing with things, it won't be permanent. None of it's permanent. And that's for security reasons. So, now what I am going to try is, no, because it reads the entire blue. Never mind. I was about to wonder if we could just like modify one tiny part of this theme blue CSS, but no, it won't work. We need to modify the entire thing. There are ways for you to clean up CSS code. I am not a web designer. I did take a class in it, so I understand what's going on, but I don't have as much of a need for me to go and change all that. So let's see if we can't get this to show our changes. Did I already push? Cool, we did. There we go. And since the text is a slightly different shade of blue, it didn't override it. It did override this because, again, this is also a different shade of blue than what we had before. But there's our yellow. So now we've adjusted the documentation page and how it looks. I think that's pretty much most everything that at least I tend to modify, because you got colors, you've got sidebar. Oh, we can talk about sidebar a little more. So another thing with the sidebar that is a little important to know, and this is with Jekyll, is when you have something like we do, where we have, this list, when you have these nested lists, there must always be one item at least. Even if you're doing, say, something like a nested one. So we have arithmetic here. Let's write an example of this. So I'm going to make a new notebook, and it'll just be a copy of core. And we'll call this 01 printing, right? And we're just going to have this be some very simplistic printing function. We'll call this printing prints things. And we'll write a function called print me that takes in a, print something, and, because remember, this is just for demo's sake, prints a. It prints a. Okay, we have something like that. Now I can go through and build my notebooks again and rebuild my documentation. But remember, we're talking about that sidebar. So let's talk about that sidebar. Now, right now, that wasn't added in there because we told nbdev we don't want to auto-generate that sidebar. We want to have our own special one that we made from our tender love and care of wanting to tweak absolutely everything we possibly can. But how do, say, we get a list like this, where we have a list inside of a list? Now, it's not as simple as doing something like this, for example, which we might expect, where it would be something like, we can say this as printing, and then we'll say printing.html, right? We could do something like this, but that's not quite right because it expects it to be a JSON, and this is not a JSON. So Jekyll is weird. Jekyll is very weird. And so when we want a nested list, we just give it no title. And I'm trying to remember, for a double nested list, if we go to the Walk with FastAI GitHub, this will show us it. Yeah, so we literally start with like our intro section, right? A blank section, and then we go empty 1, empty 2, and so forth. And what Jekyll will do is go ahead and render it like this for us, instead of having like empty 1, empty 2. So here I have empty quotes. And actually, yeah, this should work. We have arithmetic, and then we have empty quotes followed by printing and printing.html. So now I'm going to build the documentation one more time. We're going to add everything we just did. Nested documentation links. So all of those are specific nbdev functionalities. I would recommend taking a look at the documentation to learn more about that, just because that's sadly not the focus of the stream here as much. As much as I love to talk about nbdev. So now that we sent that off to be rendered, all that's left now is for us to take a look at our new source code. So we'll give it a moment to re-render everything. But what we should see here is performing math, should have arithmetic, and then another option saying printing, I believe. Unless we broke the JSON. There we go. Cached. All right. Oh, except maybe it wasn't cached. Hello. Did we break you? We did. Why did we break you? Does it need to be double cached? No. Let me make sure I didn't mess this up. Printing HTML is fine. Did our config magically get changed? Again. It did. Oh. What I need to figure out is why we keep changing to that. Because Walk with FastAI doesn't have that breaking on me as much. Let's go find out. What specifically about my settings lets me have Walk with FastAI there, but have everything else not break in my config? So, repository, remote theme, company name, base URL. Interesting. Lib name, user, git URL, .co space URL. Weird. I don't quite understand why base URL keeps changing. Oh, that's why. Doc base URL. Okay. We can switch that. Let's change how that looks. This is going to be slash. Oh, this needs to be slash documentation demo. There we go. That's our fix. So if we have anything like that, check to make sure that any of these templated strings in here aren't picking up what you want. So in our case, the doc base URL by default was set to the same name as the library, when in fact we don't have that. So go ahead and pull up our Discord chat. No, we don't actually. Because GitHub will go ahead and do it for us. I believe it shouldn't need the slash. Actually, ooh, no, we do. Nice eye. I thought I put a slash at the end instead of the beginning, which might actually cause us more issues. We'll see. But in the meantime, let's pull up our documentation again. We don't actually have you open. Cool. There we go. And in our performing math, we have arithmetic and printing, which doesn't have anything in it. And the reason for that is probably because yeah, you coding is like that in general. It's not a fast process. It's not a super quick you're there. It's you fight with it for a while and eventually you make progress. If you have tenacity, you'll make it far in this field. And really anything you do. So currently, printing does not seem to be going to what we want. Why is that? Let's look at the working solution, which is what you should always do in this case. So I tend to look at working solutions that someone else has done and compared it to my own to figure out what went wrong. So here we're looking at Sidebar Json. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and see what's different. Yeah, literally, as we're sitting here crying. Really, I'm getting some feedback. There we go. That looks to be fine. Actually, it's not. Oh, wait, I know why. Because it needs to be something like that, doesn't it? It's weird. Yes. Okay. All right. So then what we do is, so we have the blank name here, right? But we still need to name it something. This section isn't named. So we're going to call this printing utilities. And now we have what our actual URLs are. So we're going to say printing or help me. Now that we have it there, it's going to be in the printing utilities note followed by help me. That's just a weird, annoying Jekyll thing with this template. Other ones are easier to do where I can just have like nested loops or nested JSONs with that. I don't know. This gets the job done. I don't particularly care too much about it. After we render the documentation, if this modifies the config.yml, I am going to go get some onions. It did not. All right, cool. We fixed everything. All right, and now if we wait a hot moment, to reload our web page, I probably was too fast. There we go. There's our help me. And if we click it, it takes us to our print things. So now we have a very basic nested taskbar. I think that's most everything you should modify with these. Changing the whole looks and everything, I don't try and do. You're going to want a different theme for that. And really customizing it any further, you're going to need a hefty knowledge of CSS and HTML and Jekyll. Which is always good. That skill will take you places always, because, I mean, it's in a situation like this where I'm trying to render my own documentation and I want to tweak it. The last thing that we'll go ahead and do is talk about local rendering. So you've seen me so far where I've sent in 6 different GitHub commits for adjusting my my documentation, but wouldn't it be nice if we could do that locally? For me personally, I don't do it locally as much because with work we tend to have instanced environments to where it's kind of like collab, where we start from the same base and build up from it. And so it's kind of hard to reinstall everything, but here we can. So if we look at the nbdev template repo, I believe it has instructions for this. Oh, no, that's right, because Haml just updated the README with this. Let's take a look at what Haml has included in here, because this is actually what we're going to do. And Haml thankfully put down some instructions for previewing our documentation locally. So I'm just going to read it back to you guys. It's often desirable to preview nbdev documentation locally before having it rendered by, say, something like GitHub Pages. This requires us to run Jekyll locally, which requires something called Ruby and something called Jekyll. And how to install Jekyll is install instructions are provided on their website, which are very easy to do. You can then run the command make docs serve after calling nbdev build docs to generate the docs and run it. In order to allow you to run Jekyll locally, this project contains manifest files called gem files that specify all Ruby dependencies for nbdev and Jekyll. If we don't want to do this, we can go ahead and delete those gem files and avoid any future security emails that GitHub will decide to call us. Personally, I delete them at work, but that's because we don't do anything with local documentation. My recommendation is you do keep it in there because it's helpful. All right, so it says that we need to run these things. So let's go into my terminal and clear everything out. And go ahead and install all these things that it wants us to. So we have gem, and it's probably gonna, no. I don't think I'll have to do sudo. All right, so the first thing we have to do is install Ruby. So sudo apt install Ruby. Yeah, thought I got it right the first time, but we didn't. All right, so we're installing Ruby, which is the first thing we want. This might take a moment. Sorry, slow internet. Yeah, it's gonna take a hot minute. Personally, this is going to look very scary, I think, probably for those of you like DDIML, where, you've never really had to deal with anything like this before. So we're going to be doing a lot of scary things. You just care about gem install bundler Jekyll. That's actually all we need to do. So you just need to run this. Now let's go back to the README. Next, we're in the root of, I think it's 100% right. I think that should be the root of your documentation. Because I think now we do make docs serve. Interesting. Uh-oh. No, we do, because here's the make file. So now we do make docs serve. Bundle. What are we missing? Oh, that's what. First we installed Ruby, but we didn't actually install Jekyll. Yeah, it's going to make me do sudo. You shouldn't have to do sudo. I do. Now it's going to go through and make sure we have everything. I might also have to install Ruby. Let's see, does this work still? No, all right. Install Ruby. Thank you. Yeah, my room has everything Batman. I'm a very huge DC nerd. Sometimes I'll stream with my DC shirt on, which has like 20 superheroes on each side. All right, so the one thing we did have to do was install Ruby, which that's fine. So it's currently installing Ruby, and ideally after we install Ruby, this no longer breaks on us. Just give it a moment to install. This is the other reason why generally I don't do it locally too much. While this is a one-time thing, I don't know. I can survive the attack to my pride by showing that I, made a commit to render everything. All right, so now we just wait for that to install. Why are you taking forever? There we go. All right. Took it a moment. All right, so now if we do make stock serve, gem files. Oh wait, now we need to do. I think we need to rerun this again. So we're trying first installing Ruby and then installing Jekyll. And my money, if this works, is Gem needs to be able to link up with Ruby for it to work. But we'll see. it's going to take a hot minute, which is always fun. In the meantime, was there anything else really documentation-wise that we needed to look at? Assets, we talked about that. Oh, if you have any sort of Markdown files, you're going to want to put them in here. So in the general docs folder. So like, for example, I'll just make a new one. We'll call this testing.md. Well, no, let's do this the right way and do it in here. So we'll call this test me. I'm going to give it a heading, basically saying, this is my Markdown file. We're testing this out. And then in our sidebar, we'll go ahead and say testing Markdown, which we will then say that this is going to point to, and actually, we need to continue this on down here. We'll say testme.md. So now we can go back through here, do nbdev build docs. Unexpected closed in my sidebar. What did we do? This is why JSON lint was invented. I think it has to be that. There we go. Why JSON lint is my best friend. Yep. All right, and git push origin master. And let's go check in on how this is doing. Well, I hope to interrupt it because it wouldn't take too long, but I guess it took too long. All right, now if we go back to here and look at our documentation website, performing math, printing utilities, testing Markdown, and we have our Markdown file over here. Now, why it's not 100% rendered properly, I think, is because we need something a little special up there, which if we do, I'll go ahead and talk about that. Let's see. I need an example in the FastAI documentation for me to look at. Yes, we do need something special. This is going to look kind of similar if you've used, what's it called? Fast pages. We need to tell Jekyll what this is. So we're going to say title, Markdown testing. And then after that, even though it's very weirdly syntaxed, it'll be able to render. And let me go ahead and grab my password again. So this title should be also the title that pops up whenever we look at the documentation. So it's going to render as two different like H1s, if you will. See how you're going. Are you making any progress? Not really. If we don't make it to there, it's not the end of the world. It's annoying to get this working locally. YAML might be... Well, it generates YAML. So if we go to the data sidebars, it generates it as a YAML. So you can modify this if you want to, but check the recording to go back, and I briefly talk about how you would set that up to where like nbdev doesn't automatically overwrite everything you do. Because yes, at the end of the day, this is all YAML that we use, and the JSON is just how we take something readable for us and turn it into something unreadable from a first glance. Via the stream schedule, not really. I mean, I tend to post on Twitch at least a few hours in advance if I can. Yes, better for you, horrible for me. Usually my Twitter's a good way to keep an eye on if I'm thinking about streaming. Hang on, I'll drop a link. I think that goes to my Twitter feed. It better. Yep, it does. I'm not quite that tired, thankfully. Yeah, that's going to take a while, so we're just not going to worry about it this stream. So back to our documentation. If we go to Mueller, documentation demo, performing math, and it should actually just be test me. There we go. You can see that it dropped the .md, and now it's just test me, and here it is. So if we wanted to quote-unquote finish this off, in Sidebar Json, this would just point to test me. And since Jekyll is not wanting to install, once that's pushed, we're basically done. I know, basically. But that should cover pretty much everything you'd need to modify in nbdev and the documentation to really get it how you want and tweak it how you can. Because with that, we can convert it into something like this, where it's nice green. We have my logo. We have a nice tree as the fave icon. And, everything works how it should. Later today, on top of having the Twitch VOD, I'm also going to upload it to YouTube. So if I open this in a new tab, though, real quick. I'll go ahead and throw my YouTube link in there. Lately, I haven't been uploading to YouTube as much, mostly because I've been enjoying the Twitch atmosphere a lot more and the interface. But any important streams, such as this one, I will one-for-one take it from Twitch and just store it on YouTube. So otherwise, thanks for joining me through our wonderful debugging and customizing nbdev. See you guys next stream.